All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Annie Pease. I'm a project coordinator in the City of Cleveland's Office of Capital Projects. I'm very excited to welcome you to the first virtual mini conference of the Greater Cleveland Trails and Greenway Conference programming. Our goal is to host focused information and training sessions about topics of trails and bikeways in the year we are not hosting an in-person conference. So this is our off year. And we will be hosting an in-person conference in 2023. And we're looking for new members and new ideas to join our planning committee. So if you're interested in joining, please contact Elaine Price at County Planning. Today's sessions are being recorded for future access. The presentation materials and the recordings will be posted on the Greater Cleveland Trails website within a week. That's gctrails.org. I'll mention that website a couple more times. I do want to note that there is still room available on the mobile workshops this afternoon. There are two options at 2 o'clock and then a bike tour after that. You can find more information and register at the Greater Cleveland Trails website, gctrails.org. A couple notes on the mobile workshops this afternoon. I do want to note that the meeting location for the Euclid Creek Trails mobile workshop there was a little bit of confusion with the address in the initial Eventbrite description. I believe it's been corrected, but if you're planning to attend that workshop, the meeting location is the Highland Picnic Area Shelter, and that's at the corner of Highland Road and Euclid Creek Parkway inside the Euclid Creek Reservation. If you're interested or you're on the fence about registering for this mobile workshop, this is a very cool behind the scenes tour of an under construction trail and more information about all the work happening in the area. But you don't often get that behind the scenes look at the project as it's being constructed. So don't miss out on that one if you're interested. Additionally, if you plan to join the Harrison Dillard bike tour, please bring your own helmet. Helmets are mandatory to participate in the ride, and they will not be provided on site. Continuing education credits are available for these sessions through the American Planning Association and the Outdoor Parks and Recreation Association. And for more information about how to obtain your CEUs is available through gctrails.org. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce our session today on the countywide trail signage program. Our speakers today are Alex Harnotes and Sarah Burns-Meyer. Alex is the Director of Destination Development at Destination Cleveland. In this role, he focuses on elevating the experience and perception of Cleveland through placemaking, strengthening relationships, and creating experiences. He manages Destination Cleveland's physical assets, including the Cleveland script signs and the pedestrian wayfinding program. He works with Destination Cleveland's public sector and nonprofit partners to improve the built environment and how we experience it. Alex holds a master's degree from The Ohio State University and is a certified planner through AICP. Sarah Burns-Meyer is a principal planner at the Cleveland Metro Parks. There she focuses on trail planning. She led the application team that received a $7.95 million Tiger Grant for the Reconnecting Cleveland Trail project that was completed in 2021. She also led the 2021 RAISE application, which secured nearly $1 million in federal funding for 4 trail projects on Cleveland's east side. She has prior experience in commercial real estate lending and regional planning. Sarah also holds a master's degree in urban planning, design, and development from Cleveland State University. Before I turn this presentation over to our speakers, I have a note of housekeeping. Following the presentation, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A with our speakers. We need your questions for a robust Q&A. So throughout the presentation, please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box. You'll see the chat on your end is disabled, so please use the Q&A box. We'll be monitoring it and look forward to diving into those questions during our Q&A. So at this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Alex to kick us off.
Thanks, Annie. And thank everybody else for your time with us today. So I'm going to give some background on the Unified Wayfinding Plan for Off-Road Trails. I think that this has been a really interesting process. For some of you, this will be something you're familiar with, that you've worked on or worked with us on. For some of you, it'll be new information, and for some of you, it'll be a little bit of a sales pitch because we're looking for adoption of this plan in other communities. I'll tell you where we've been so far. So Sarah, if you'd advance one slide for me. We're going to go back to the beginning and the purpose of this unified wayfinding plan. And I think that one thing that might be instructive here, you may be wondering why I, from Destination Cleveland, from our destination marketing organization, why Destination Cleveland is involved in this process at all. And that's because looking back to about 2015, 2016, we looked around at all the great plans that were coming together, especially for off-road trails that were going to connect in downtown Cleveland. And we said, this is so great. We're going to have all these, you see the images in front of you of the ribbon cuttings that happened in 2020 and 2021. Last year was a huge year for ribbon cuttings, and those were great. We have many people on this call to thank for their sustained efforts to make these trails happen. But long before they were on the ground and those ribbon cuttings happened, my predecessors at Destination Cleveland looked and said, this is going to be great. However, if everyone does their own thing related to signage, it'll be very confusing, especially for the out-of-town visitors who are our bread and butter. So we looked to form a task force that was focused on creating a cohesive experience here. And our other interest in this was using the trails to support economic development in our hospitality community. So not only do we want both locals and visitors to experience the trails, we want to point to the destinations, to the attractions, to the business community that's located just off of them. And so you'll see that reflected through some of this work. But that's how Destination Cleveland, as our Convention and Visitors Bureau and as our destination marketing organization, got involved in this work. So, we came to the table to all these public partners that you'll see listed on the next slide with an idea to form a task force and to try to develop this unified system for wayfinding, no matter who builds the trail, maintains the trail, all of these things that were coming together in downtown. So this involved us at Destination Cleveland, the City of Cleveland, the county, the Metro Parks, NOACA, Bike Cleveland, Canalway Partners. All these folks were involved in trail building and maintenance at the time, and then even broader than that as we started to get the full scope of the project. So we assembled these people, and Destination Cleveland, through some of our capital destination development dollars, hired Guide Studio, who's a local design firm that specializes in wayfinding. Some of your communities have likely worked with them, and you've seen their great work around our region. So we brought on Guide, and our ask to them was, come sit with this task force, hear what we all have to say, compile those recommendations, and turn them into a formal plan for wayfinding across our off-road trails. You'll see as we go on that scope expanded a little bit even, but that was the initial ask and what we started talking about back 2017 or so. So yep, there we go. So the first place the signage system designed by Guide and with the input and guidance of the task force came about was on the Lakefront West Bikeway. So most of you are familiar with this. Lakefront West Bikeway was part of the rehabilitation of the Shoreway, the West Shoreway. And so we had these initial recommendations. We had a sign plan, and we had a fairly simple, linear trail to use as a pilot project. So if you're a rider and you spend any time on the west side, you're likely familiar with these, the big blue signs along the trail. These now have been in the ground for about 3 summers. Summer of 2019, we did some survey work, collecting surveys from trail users, and we've adjusted the recommendations for the overall project based on, feedback, those surveys and experiences as we've worked in some more complex environments that Sarah will talk about going forward. So if you go ahead, continued installation, you'll hear much more about this from Sarah, but Cleveland Metro Parks is part of the Tiger Grant Fund trails, committed to installing this signage package on all of those trails. 2021, it started to go in on the towpath in phases 3 and 4, the Camp Cleveland section and elsewhere. And then presently they're working on bringing this sign package to the other Tiger funded trails. So what is in the plan? We'll unpack it a little bit, not too far. Don't want to get super in the weeds, but I want to show you more or less what is in the plan. The major sections are graphic standards, sign standards, shop drawings, and most interestingly, at least to me as a practitioner, templates that you can use if your community is interested in using and adopting the plan. So first, graphic standards. The sign that's pictured in front of you is an on-trail directional. It's probably the most common sign in the system, so we'll use it as an example sort of throughout here. And what you'll see is it's a little different than the ones that were on Lakefront Bikeway. We've made some innovations to the plan and some adjustments, but this is what Lakefront Bikeway will look like initially. So all of these signs across the system are going to have the same gray background. One thing that we wanted to tackle with this system, and was the real challenge in getting all of these organizations and trail builders and trail maintainers to work together, was how to get to a highly standardized product while still allowing for local branding, local recognition of who's building and taking care of this trail. And so you'll see that in the gray portions of the sign, this is essentially all standardized information. Starting at the very top, what can you do on this trail? You can bike, you can walk a dog. There's other icons available for handicap accessibility and other functions as appropriate for where you are. Below that band is one of those opportunities for customization. So if the trail or the municipality that's located in, whatever the name of this thing is, it goes in that first colored band. The second colored band, again, the color is an opportunity for branding, but the copy in there is either the municipality or the city of Cleveland neighborhood that the sign you are looking at physically is in. This is something that we learned with the pedestrian wayfinding system that Destination Cleveland constructed, and which I manage. You'll be familiar with those big black map cabinets around downtown and some of our other inner neighborhoods. At the very top of those, it always tells you first thing where you are. It's important for wayfinding, especially for visitors who are unfamiliar with the city. And so we carried that forward in this package as well. So that copy is always the place where you physically are at looking at this sign. And then it tells you where you can go from here. You know, if you need to make a turn, or if you continue on the way that you're going, what you can do when you get there. So if you make it to the Edgewater Beach House, there's food, there's drink, there's restrooms. Those are the important things to know. How far it ought to take you if you're walking, and how far it ought to take you if you're riding a bike. At the very bottom of the sign, you'll see in the lower left-hand corner, if the trail is part of the Cuyahoga Greenways network, there's a medallion there that says, yep, this is part of Cuyahoga Greenways. And then in the lower right-hand corner is the last piece of customization information. So the name or the logo of the organization that maintains and takes care of that trail is down there. And in some cases, there'll be contact information. I think we've put a phone number for the Metro Parks Rangers down there for if there's an emergency on this particular trail, this is who you call. So a good deal of the information you need is on this sign as the sort of standard, most commonly occurring thing throughout the system. The next slide shows a few of the other signs within the package. So there's an orientation kiosk that gives a little more information, contains a map. That orientation kiosk can be two-sided. So a lot of the time, if you're if you're entering the trail from a trailhead, you would see a map coming in. If you're exiting, you would get the directional on the reverse side that tells you, up the street this way is food and drink, up the street this way is this attraction or the rapid station, or all of those other destinations that we point to. You see the on-trail directional in the middle, and then we've got a finger pointer designed for complex intersections that we'll talk about in a little bit. So these are the main sign types for the off-road trails that are included in the overall package. So if you go ahead, Sarah, I think you're probably best suited to talk about these installation options because you've spent a lot of time with your sign shop working on them.
Yeah, so thanks, Alex, for framing that up. So what Cleveland Metro Parks has done is taken this signage standard and this guideline and applied it to create these signs. And the guidelines and the wayfinding system provides a lot of detail on that. However, it doesn't do everything. It provides you with the framework to be able to create the signs. But one of the things that we found is there needs to be a little bit of flexibility. There's the different installation options that we work through as a park district. We install signs all the time. We have an inventory of all of our signs. The guidelines do provide different installation techniques with direct burial and breakaway options. We also, one of the things with developing this program was we wanted to make sure that it was accessible and available to a lot of communities, and that is oftentimes driven by price. And so the system that was put in on Edgewater Parkway was very nice. It was higher end. It was custom posts and custom mounting. And so what we did was take this and look at what are other options, doing a U-channel installation or a 2-inch perforated post. That is what is standard for a lot of communities. City of Cleveland uses that as their standard. And so we've taken that and adjusted it with the program to kind of find that sweet spot of something that's aesthetically pleasing, but also will be easier cost-wise to install and maintain into the future. And so that's one of the things, like this is showing the direct burial. You can also just do it as a pounded installation. And that's something where, I'm not a sign person. And we actually had our signage coordinator retire, our long-term signage coordinator retire earlier in the year. And so some of this was learning as you go and talking to City of Cleveland sign shop of what are the materials that they use, talking to vendors, and then also coordinating internally with our park management staff and with our trades crews and figuring out what was going to be the installation technique that we're using. And let's see if it'll advance for me now. There we go. So one of the things that Alex talked about a little bit, I'll follow up with, is the templates that are available. And so the guidelines are great in that they give you the why and the hierarchies and all of that, but it also comes with the design files. It's not just the written wayfinding guidelines. It's the actual templates that lay out all of this information literally to the T of, 5 inches down from the top is where you start that first color band. And all of that's preloaded into these templates, and it makes, putting the system together a whole lot easier. You've got something to work from. You've got, the directions in front of you. What goes on to the sign, however, is a little bit of art and science. And that's something that we found in laying out the program. And we have done it for the Tiger Trails. The signs are kind of in final layout right now, so we don't have them installed at this point, so you can't go out and take a look at them. But one of the things that we found is you have to make a lot of decisions. The guidelines are really great, but especially when you've got a very busy area in terms of multiple trails joining into each other, you've got to use some flexibility and some discretion of what's the goal of the program and how's the best way to get there. So again, the templates that are provided, these are extremely helpful. It sets the rules, it sets the framework, little things like how do you arrive at that, walking distance and biking distance? Well, it gives the conversion of we're going on, it takes 10 minutes to walk a half a mile, and it takes about 15 minutes to bike 3 miles. And so those are all included in the guidelines. And the actual templates provide you that information of where to put this, put the text on the actual sign faces and how that works. And the rules of how much to include too on the sign faces. There are limits of what is readable and what someone would be able to absorb. And so the guidelines are very helpful in that regard. So some of the expected challenges, we knew putting this project together, laying out the system, we weren't picking an easy trail to start with, or trail system to start with. We picked probably like the hardest one that we could, in terms of you're dealing with a very porous situation with lots of neighborhood streets intersecting and different trails intersecting, and it's in the flats area, so you're not even dealing with right angles a lot of times. So we kind of jumped feet first into it, and so we were expecting, how are we going to deal with different situations where we do have multiple trails that are intersecting? How do we communicate that information in a clear way? And that's, again, going back to the guidelines, they help clarify some of those things, like having the colors continue through. So what you're seeing here is a finger pointer that is at the junction point of the Towpath Trail and the Cleveland Foundation Centennial Lake Link Trail, right by the Scranton Flats. So you're at the base of the Scranton Peninsula, right after you get down the hill from Sokolowski's overlook area. And you have the decision point as a user. Are you going to go to the right, or are you going to go forward onto the Cleveland Foundation Centennial Lake Link Trail? And we continue the colors through those header bars on the sign faces. Those have that constant color. And so we have that green color that is consistent with the Cleveland Metro Parks sign faces. We also have the Cleveland Lakefront Bikeway, which has that consistent blue. That is the kind of branded color for it. And then for the Towpath Trail, we have that kind of orange color. And so that's one of those things that we knew that there would be some of the challenges of these intersecting trails. We were relying on the guidelines to help us make that a little bit more clear for the user. And ultimately, that's what we had to keep in mind kind of throughout, is what's going to be clear to a user as they're encountering this system. And so another expected challenge was definitely working with an existing signage system. A lot of communities have spent time and money developing their own branding and wayfinding. The wayfinding at its base has similar components. You're directing people around at decision points, and there's a certain frequency that you need to have signs to be a confidence marker going through. But one of the things that even internally that we found with Cleveland Metro Parks is we have a very, very strong brand. We're also very protective of that brand. And so we're not foregoing our existing signage for the wayfinding program. What we found is a way to balance both of them. So we are still using our existing signage that you can see and automatically identify as Cleveland Metro Parks. And we're using the colors of Cleveland Metro Parks in the wayfinding signage. But where we have our own internal wayfinding that's more for the hiking and bridle trails and more of the wood routed signage and that sort of look, we are utilizing this wayfinding system on some of our other trails and the new trails that are going in. And so they speak to one another. They're not a replacement, but they coexist. And I think that's an important point too for municipalities that might want to include this system, is if you have established, a branding, a logo, certain colors, you can incorporate that into the wayfinding system. And so we have those kind of standardizations of, if you have those colors, that you have the main color band at 100% saturation. And then that secondary color band is just a lighter version of that 70%. You have to make sure that it does meet the ADA requirements for visibility, that there's enough contrast. And then we have the established colors too that we've kind of talked about, like that Cleveland Lakefront Bikeway. There have been Cleveland Lakefront Bikeway signs in the environment for what, close to 20 years, something like that. So people associate that logo, they associate that blue color with the Cleveland Lakefront Bikeway. We're not messing with that. We're including it. Towpath has those colors. Cleveland Metro Parks has the green colors. So we're incorporating those. One of the things that we did end up coming up with was a kind of generic base color. And that's like the default color, not generic, that's probably the wrong term. A default color for anything that's part of the Cuyahoga Greenway system. We created some branding around that when that Cuyahoga Greenways plan was created. And so we're utilizing the main colors from that gray, a blue, and a green. And so there are ways to customize for municipalities that want to continue colors and utilize logos so that there's flexibility within the system to utilize that. So here's the colors I was just talking about, the green and blue and gray. And then this was another expected challenge. As Alex mentioned earlier on, Destination Cleveland went through and did the off-road trail system, developed the wayfinding for that, developed the program for that. But as we developed the Cuyahoga Greenways plan, not everything is off-road. It's not an off-road trail for all these connections. And as you're building a system, you're going to need different typologies. So at the start of the pandemic, Cleveland Metro Parks took that wayfinding system and contracted with Guide Studio to create an on-road sign family. It works with the off-road system, but it creates that opportunity for neighborhood greenways. This is, case in point is Brighton Park in Cleveland. There is a trail that continues through. It's part of the trail that goes through the zoo and Brookside Reservation, goes through Brighton Park, an off-road trail, but then it connects through Treadway Creek Trail and down to the Towpath Trail, but it goes through a neighborhood, a pretty quiet neighborhood, low stress streets, low volume streets, low speed streets. And so that was a perfect opportunity to have neighborhood greenway or bike boulevards, another term for it. And that's something that's being piloted by the city of Cleveland. And so we developed a signage typology that works with that. These are signs that are indicating that when that off-road trail ends, you can continue along and make it to your destination, that this is the handoff. These are the pieces that let you know you're on the right route. And so that continues on this kind of low stress system where you are on road, but you know that you're still on the correct route because you have this signage that kind of holds your hand the whole way. And then that connects you, because throughout Cuyahoga County, not everything is going to be off-road trails. And so this helps with that connective tissue between those segments. And then another of our expected challenges was, how do you get everyone to review and agree upon what goes on those sign faces? And so Cleveland Metro Parks established a review group for our wayfinding program for the Tiger Trails. And that the Tiger Trails includes the Red Line Greenway, the Whiskey Island Trail, Windy Park Bridge. It also includes 2 smaller connectors in the Flats area. And then we also developed the program on the Cleveland Foundation Centennial Lakeling Trail. Those weren't funded by the Tiger program, but they're part of the whole piece of the trail system down there. And then also for the east side lakefront from East 55th to MLK area and the Lakefront Management Center up there. So one of the things that we did is we wanted to make the review of this system as approachable as possible. And so we developed internally an online viewing platform where you could actually, we assembled a group of reviewers, internal and external stakeholders to test this out. Because again, we picked some of the hardest trails that you could possibly pick to develop a system. So we wanted to make sure that we got it right. And so we wanted to make that review process as easy as possible. So what we did is we mocked up what those sign faces would look like and loaded it into this MapStore online mapping program. And it shows you on a map where the signs are. You can click on them. And I'm going to try to make sure that we can get back into the presentation. I'm going to do a live link to this. And it's loading. Alex, thumbs up, see it?
Looks good.
All right. So this actually lets a reviewer zoom in and out. And I have to give special thanks to our GIS department here at Cleveland Metro Parks. They did an awesome job loading this in. And then our former intern, planning and design intern, Colin Quiet, did a ton of work on this whole system. So it wouldn't be possible without him. He actually mocked up the sign faces. But this allows a reviewer to see the entire system and kind of move through and see where are these signs going to be. We also had some supplemental information that showed what other signs were actually in the environment in addition to the signs, because that's one of the issues with doing a signage program is sign clutter. So that was included in part of the review. But one of the nice things about this is you can actually look at what's the entire sign face. You can zoom in, you can look at the content, you can look at where it is within the whole system, and you can move yourself around. One thing is MapStore is a little bit slow to load. So hopefully it's showing you everything in real time as it's showing it with me. But then you can click over and see what's the next sign that we're talking about here. Oh, a finger pointer at this location. So it gives reviewers the opportunities to say, I don't really like that location. I don't like the content that's on there. And then this was also useful for field visits with our park management crew, who have obviously so much intimate knowledge of the reservations. They know if that location is going to cause issues of people queuing up, or there's buried utilities that I didn't know about that they know about, especially on Whiskey Island. The utilities are kind of wacky over there because it's very old. And then obviously before you go to install anything, you would have to do utility locations, have boots come out and mark anything so you don't cause any issues. But this was a really helpful way to do the entire review process and make it a little bit easier when you're asking people to spend time reviewing the system to make sure you got it right, kind of give it in a way that makes sense for people. I'm going to try to get back to the presentation and make sure, there we go, thumbs up, cool. And another way to make this review system work a little bit easier is we just basically had a spreadsheet of all those sign faces, the locations. They were numbered within MapStore, lived in an Excel. People could write comments, specific comments on the locations and critiques on it. And one of the things that we made clear to our reviewers too is we're not looking for, changing up major aspects of the wayfinding program, that this is a set program. So we're asking you to review content and location more than anything and point out any errors, but we're not looking to reopen the design of the program. And with that, I'll kick it back over to Alex.
Sure. So thanks. I'm going to address some of the unexpected challenges we came across in the process of the last 2 or 3 years, finalizing the plan and installing the first couple of rounds of signs. So the first and probably the biggest feedback we got from the 2019 survey was on the maps that are in the kiosk style signs. And we had initially designed these to be extremely stylized and simplified subway style maps. So the trail itself was a straight line like you sometimes see on a simplified subway map. And it was really focused on the intersections of the trail with other trails or with the road. And it largely ignored features that were not directly in relation to the trail. The 3 that you see below you aren't exactly in evolution, but they give a good idea of what we're talking about. So the one all the way to the left is from one of the lakefront trails. And so you see, that straight blue line being the trail that you're on. It's a heads up map, so the direction you're facing is the direction the map is going. And you can see that it's very stylized and simplified down. And one of the insightful comments that we got on the survey was about the old channel of the Cuyahoga River, which if you've ridden that trail, you're really familiar with sort of looking over at Garrett Morgan Water Plant and the old river channel coming in. It's not displayed at all on this map. And so people were like, there's water down there, but there's no water on the map. I can't wrap my brain around this. Where is this water? And we thought, oh, okay, we need to build in a little more detail. So in the later evolutions, you see that it's still the straight subway map. It shows you later on when you cross a road, which side that road is on. Things like the old river channel, just building in a little more of those visual cues. Showing a north arrow, even though the map remains heads up, it shows you which way is north for folks who orient that in a different way. Excuse me. So this is a place where the plan has really been an iterative process to improve this. We've also encountered some difficulties with the maps, especially in the flats, because they're simplified in such a way that they don't really show topography and a lot of over under. So how do we depict a bridge that is very very apparent visually? That's a great, Lorain Carnegie Bridge goes over the entire flats. You can't interface with it. There's no intersection. But certainly from a wayfinding perspective, you want to know whether the place that you're going is north or south of the giant bridge you can see in the distance, right? So learning those things and working them into the plan and building better and better mapping solutions is an ongoing thing. For a trail, if you're building a little connector spur off of the towpath into your local downtown or off of the Metro Parks APT into a business district, you're not going to have to answer some of these very difficult questions, but you might. And so we're trying to refine the plan and make it as informative as possible. So going forward with more unexpected challenges. What is our next one? Technical questions, and that not everything is in the guidelines. We were hoping to make this experience as plug and play as possible. And Sarah will give you a couple instances of how it hasn't been quite plug and play, but we're getting better and better.
Yeah, so, installing a program or installing a signage program, if you haven't made signs before and installed them, there's a learning curve there. And laying out the signs themselves, the sign faces, the templates are really helpful. But as I said, you're going to encounter situations where you might have to do something that isn't, contemplated in the guidelines, and just be okay with that you have to have some flexibility. But also on some of the technical questions on, engineering concerns, it's not all in that guidebook. There's references to make sure that you talk with a signage installer, but there are reference points. It's just not to be intimidated going into it. ODOT has a lot of information about wind loading charts, and talking to an engineer that can kind of walk you through that process so that you can make sure that you feel confident in installing the product. There's also some things, we talked a little bit about the direct burial versus driven posts. Our sign shop was saying that they're more comfortable with the driven post, because then you don't have the issues if you have a direct burial into concrete, that with our freeze thaw, especially along the lakefront and the conditions there, that it can be more problematic than just doing a direct burial, that would have sufficient rigidity, but also flexibility, that the sign's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to get dislodged. It'll withstand the elements. One of the things too that we found kind of throughout this process was, part of it was iterating it to make sure that we were creating options that were affordable. This picture here shows that specialty post, the center mounted specialty post, but we also have the flexibility to use that 2-inch perforated post, painted perforated post, and then you can bolt in on the sides. This one shows actually being bolted onto that specialty post. And part of that's because doing the kind of more specialized installation with an adhesive where you don't end up having any perforations on the face of the sign, which is aesthetically the best way. With some of the conditions along the lakefront with the Edgewater Parkway, Shoreway project, some of those sign faces were actually failing. The adhesive was failing. And so that causes its own issues. And so that kind of middle ground was, it's not a U-channel post, it's prettier than that, but doing 2 posts that you bolt the sign faces into, they're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to fall off. And then you can design around where those connection points are so that you're not going through any of the text on the sign front. Again, I mentioned the utility locations. Obviously, if you're going to drive anything 4 feet into the ground, you need to make sure that you're not going to hit any sort of utility there. So make sure you call OOPS. If you are a municipality that's working with, you know, your streets crew or anyone else to install this program, because it was designed that you could install it in-house, they've encountered this before. Just talk with your sign shop, talk with your service director, and you know, work hand in hand with them as you're trying to install this program. And then the idea of, can you install it in-house versus contracted services? That was another move to, you know, the less of the specialty. It's great if you can do the specialty, but a lot of communities can't afford that. So using your in-house crews to do the installation versus having to have specialty installers for, you know, bigger signposts and things. Just something to keep in mind as you want to go through and maybe install the system, you know, modify it and then install it for your own community. And then I feel like this is the recurring theme over the last 2 years, but supply chain and materials availability. That has led to longer lead times, and then even just finding vendors, because obviously the wayfinding guide doesn't spell out who you contact for materials, because it's supposed to be just kind of more of a guideline. You have to find your own vendors, but finding vendors that have the materials in stock can be a little bit problematic. So good old supply chain issues. And then certainly the art and the science of applying the system. You know, it really is that it gives you a good framework, but you're going to have to use your own discretion about making some of the decisions of what goes onto the sign face, because you can't fit everything. And also just flexibility for the adaptation. Like we had a couple of instances of laying this out of, you know, we really don't need a full-blown sign, but we need some sort of confidence marker, even just a small little sign to let people know that you're on the right track. It wasn't in the off-road trails program of signs, but in talking with Guide, who was very helpful through this process of like doing the checks and balances. We did our internal review, but then we also had Guide Studio take a look at that after it went through the internal review to be like, okay, you know, you did this well, you might want to think about changing something here. And usually it was in one of those pieces of like, it wasn't really spelled out totally in the guidelines. One instance was instead of saying that you're exiting into downtown, which is technically the neighborhood, it made more sense to say that you're on the Flats West Bank. And that went kind of a little bit against the guidance that was in that wayfinding manual, but that's what makes the most sense for the user. And that's really what we're designing around, is making sure that this is a wayfinding system that will help people move around the trail system, regardless of who is managing the trail, what trail it is. They just want to be able to get from A to B and not get lost. But the confidence marker wasn't part of the program. We're adding it back in for those places where it's a constrained location. You know, maybe you can't fit a sign in, or it really doesn't make sense. You just need that little breadcrumb to let people know, keep going, you're on the right track. You can also utilize things like pavement markings or co-locations. This all assumes that you have, you know, a separate post for all of these signs, but again, in some certain constrained locations, especially where there's utilities running on both sides of the trail, you might need to actually co-locate on a light pole and just make sure it's your own light pole and you don't have to gain permits or anything for it. And then again, the complexity of some of these decisions, you know, it's not all totally cut and dry. And that's where having that review team, having other eyes, ours included people, we actually have a signage committee at Cleveland Metro Parks that's a cross section. It has police, it has marketing, it has park operations staff on it. Having them review it, having outside agencies review it, the Cuyahoga Greenways Wayfinding Committee reviewed it. Having those different eyes on it helps make you feel more comfortable. Yes, this is the right decision, or maybe we need to tweak this here and there. But the Cuyahoga Greenway partners, if a community is wanting to utilize this program and install in their community, there will be assistance from Cuyahoga Greenways just to make sure that everyone is applying this wayfinding system consistently, because we need that consistency for it to work throughout the county. There are certain rules, some of them you need a little flexibility on, and others really are imperative to the system working correctly. And I will pass it back to Alex.
Sure. So Sarah touched on this a little bit earlier, but one of the unexpected questions we got as we started to shop this around to other municipalities was, what if I don't want to customize, the customizable elements of the sign? The appeal of this is that it's easy, and I've been telling people that the contents of this plan, if you're going to install signage on an off-road trail, probably get you 80% of the way there. This lays a lot of the groundwork. It takes a lot of the design out of it. We've talked about the decisions that still need to be made and the work that still needs to be done on the local level for the specifics. But if you compare this to starting from scratch, it really gets you 70–80% plus of the way. And so in talking, especially with some of our smaller municipalities, well, we don't need to pick a color, just tell us what it is. And so we've set that standard color palette with this green and blue that speaks to the Cuyahoga Greenways logo. We've done all the back checking. It meets all of the ADA requirements. It's very visible. Everything shows up. And so it'd be easy to say, use these colors. If you have a logo, it needs to fit in this box, and give us, your city's municipal logo or seal or whatever. It needs to fit in this box at the bottom. And then we're just talking about where the arrows point to, and where the signs physically go in the ground. And so that's pretty exciting. If you've got limited in-house capabilities, or if you just have a small project that needs an easy solution, there's really gets you a lot of the way there. So we were a little surprised by that. We thought everyone would want their colors and their logo and to tweak even more. But we were surprised that some folks just want the easy, and I can respect that. And so we got a few more unexpected challenges. We can advance. What about bigger systems? So we took some criticism last summer, and deserved. The long distance touring is becoming a bigger and bigger thing, especially as more of the network moves off-road. And so we heard from a couple of different groups of cyclists who were going from Cincinnati to Cleveland on the Ohio and Erie Trail. And they said, down south and through the middle of the state, there's really great signage for the national bike routes, and especially for the Ohio bike routes, particularly Ohio 1, which is largely the towpath. They said, going through the middle of the state, it was great. We had confidence. We knew we were going in the right place, and we sort of came into Cuyahoga County, and all the signage was local, if there was at all. I said, oh, we kind of overlooked that in a way. And so we've gone back into the standards and started to think about how we can add medallions for state bike routes and for the national bike routes, so that you give those long distance riders confidence markers along their way, and also to sort of highlight the possibilities of those greater network systems. So in the hierarchy of things, we're certainly focused on the local, focused on Cuyahoga Greenways, but then on these routes that are longer distance routes, working on how to work those in and to acknowledge them and to help out those long distance riders.
Yeah, and with that, this map might be a little bit hard for folks to see, but this is the Cuyahoga Greenways plan overlaid with the locations or the routes for the US and state bike routes. So you can see that Ohio to Erie Trail, the one medallion as well as the 21 medallion. So we do have a lot of instances of the US and state bike routes corresponding with our Greenways plan. And so, you know, that's one of the things that we are working with ODOT. ODOT is looking to add that US and state bike route signage across the state. They've tried for some grant funding for the actual materials, but they've mapped out locations where it would make sense. It's a GIS-based, analysis of, you need a sign at this level of frequency or at these decision points, and they have actually mapped out where they think that some of this signage should go. And so one of the things that we did is we took that. We're working with Kate Harley down at ODOT. She shared that the route for the number 121 and where their system was saying that we would probably need signs, and we overlaid it where we're planning on putting signs. And so there are some places where we can co-locate on our signs, again, so we don't have all that sign clutter, add the medallion to our signs, or where maybe it doesn't make sense to have that US and state bike route signs. And ODOT is being very flexible with this. They don't have the funding yet to roll out the full signage program, but they've been very flexible with saying, if you want to incorporate it on your existing signs, or if you want to have them as separate signs, they just want to make sure, again, that they're supporting that, especially the long distance rider too, of knowing that they're going in the correct direction, that you are including these signs. And so that's one of the nice things about being able to have this all kind of graphically laid out, is we took their GIS information and overlaid it and said, you know what, all right, yeah, it does make sense to have a continuation, use that medallion on the sign and keep going with it. Or it doesn't make sense here, we already have enough signs, there's not really a decision point that you have, so we don't need a sign there. So those little green bubbles are where we're planning to include those medallions on the signage that's going in. And so that's the other thing of, what is that hierarchy? Because there are so many different, like, it's almost like one of the nesting dolls. A lot of these trails, they can be part of a multi-state trail system, but then they have a statewide identity, and then made up of that are regional trails that might have a different name when you're in Cuyahoga County, like we refer to as Towpath Trail. That's what the majority of the people know it as. So what is that hierarchy? What do you include on your sign? What is the name that you're going to include? And we ended up using more of the approach of, we're not going to have logo soup at the bottom of all these signs of all the different identities. That's something that can live more in a digital space and on kiosks as well as you're entering a trailhead, to let you know all the different trails that are made up of, that might overlay this one piece of trail that you're on. But we're not including all those other identities. What we're doing is we will include the US and state bike route on these signs, but other than that, we're not really adding a whole bunch extra. It is part of the Cuyahoga Greenway system, and then if applicable, US and state bikeway medallion on it.
Yeah, so next steps, Sarah and her team are working right now on completing the installation on all the Tiger trails. Over the next couple of years, as those original lakefront bikeway signs sort of reach their natural state of good repair, we're going to be replacing them with, they have the original blue background, they have the oversimplified maps, and so we'll be replacing them eventually with signs that fully comply with the rest of the system. And we're working on completing a design package for on-road facilities. Sarah talked about the component that they added for bike boulevards. We've had suggestions from several municipalities that they'd like to use this system or an extension of this system for on-road facilities. And we said, this really isn't designed for your on-road bike lanes or even things that are forthcoming in the city of Cleveland, like the Midway or the plans on Lorraine. It would need it would need another level of design and another sort of package of sign types. So I think that those systems should speak to each other. It wasn't part of the original scope, but we're looking for, you know, expertise and funding and all that sort of stuff to extend the system to those on-road facilities as well. And we're working on adapting the process for use throughout Cuyahoga Greenways. Every time we do one of these, we learn a lot about different scenarios that the initial plan maybe didn't contemplate. We've talked through some of those and some of the hierarchy problems. And again, we keep trying to get it closer and closer to the true plug and play step. We're trying, if this system right now gets you 80% of the way, you know, maybe someday it'll be 85. It'll never do all the work for you, but it'll get you awfully close to a workable wayfinding system. So what we're looking at right now, and working closely with the county, especially with Elaine Price, is getting out into municipalities that have off-road trail or bike boulevard projects coming up to talk about if the community might adopt this sign plan. The City of Cleveland Planning Commission adopted this plan for all trails future and renovated in December of 21. So that was really encouraging and a big you know, feather in our caps as far as, you know, the biggest city and the main hub of the region has accepted this plan, and so we're looking for other communities to do the same and work together to implement it. What else as far as next steps, Sarah?
Just trying to scale it to knowing that some municipalities might just have a few trails, and what would be, you know, it might be a little intimidating thinking of this whole signage program. So looking at maybe doing some case studies of a couple of communities that want to kind of pilot this beyond what the Lakefront West, Edgewater Parkway, and Tiger Trails did, and work with them through Cuyahoga Greenway Partners to develop, you know, what does it look like for a smaller community with just a few trails to have this system? How many signs do you really need? And are there other modifications that can keep costs and maintenance down too? So that's where that small, medium, large options for integration kind of points to. We really would love to see, we being Cuyahoga Greenway Partners, since I am a part of that group, have this system, you know, utilized throughout the county. It would make it a whole lot easier for people to navigate, and so we want to figure out what are the best resources, you know, several summary documents, things like that, and further refinements for the template and the guides to help those communities be able to implement, knowing that there's going to be a variation on resources and capabilities and bandwidth.
So very practically, I would say if you're interested in this system for, you know, existing or upcoming projects in your community, the first thing to do would be to get in touch with me, with Sarah, with anyone from Cuyahoga Greenways Partner. They're sort of the official, unofficial keepers of this plan. Right now, more than willing to share the plan as it stands with you. The only thing that we're holding back at the moment are the actual Illustrator templates. You know, we've sort of decided not to put those widely out into the world because we want to have a little bit of oversight from Greenways when it comes to using them. You know, we talked about that sort of push and pull between customized and standardized, and so that's sort of the point at which we know you're really serious and you're gonna take this and go forward. So if you want a plan to share, to look over in detail, to share with your electeds or with your planning directors, get in touch. Happy to share that document. And then once we sit down and say, okay, here's the project, we're really going to do this, you know, we'll give you those templates and, you know, seek adoption from your planning commission or your council or whoever's necessary, and begin to make it happen. I think it's a really exciting process, and we're gaining some momentum in a couple communities.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to stop sharing, and then I think we do have a few questions maybe in the Q&A, so Amy's going to help us with that.
Yes, wow. Thanks so much, Sarah and Alex, for the very informational and detailed presentation on the sign plan. For anyone who might be new to signage and if you haven't gotten started yet, this is something on your radar. The moment you start walking down the sign plan yourself, you learn the great value of having a resource like the Cuyahoga Greenway partners, Alex and Sarah, who have had so much experience in this area. It's a real benefit or a great resource to the county. So I do want to make a note that if municipalities across the county have the option to, the Greenway Partners has a draft resolution to adopt this sign plan, and that can, it's a process in place to help build more knowledge across various departments within your municipality about the resource and what it is, and have that commitment at the resolution level to participate. So if you're interested in that draft resolution and that language and that process, Elaine Price at County Planning is your resource. So with that, we have several questions lined up here, and I'm going to start with kind of a broad one. And this one I'm going to direct at Sarah. At what stage of a trail project should signage be considered?
I think very much so at the beginning, especially as you need to lay out, that development of the signage program. I would say as soon as you have your alignment set, figure out what those design or those decision points are going to be, how it interface. And I know for me, having this signage system now will make that a whole lot easier, because that'll be something that's kind of playing in my mind too. Okay, how does this work in? But we were kind of designing the plane as we were flying for this with our tiger trails. And so we didn't have the signage in place, obviously, when they opened last summer. And I wish we had. I think that would have made things a lot easier, because it is a complicated area. So it would be best to have everything all open day one. So definitely have it be part of that initial planning for the trail and have it all set so that you have fabrication and installation, especially if you're contracting it out. I mean, a lot of trails you do contract signage, that is a piece of a project, just so that ideally it's all open on day one.
Thank you. To build upon that question a little bit, there's a question from David. Are the sign design specs set up such that they can be shared with local governments to be used in plan sets to meet criteria for projects which must go out to bid for federal funding?
Yeah, I think they could probably be integrated into sign specifications. And there are a lot of kind of notes at the back of that wayfinding guide. There is flexibility too with wayfinding signage that you can customize it quite a bit, where you do have to be careful as in if you're within a road right of way, that you have to be compliant with materials, breakaway posts and things like that, and conform to the manual uniform traffic control devices. And so that's where there's a little bit of a difference. It's easier a little bit on the off-road trails where you're not within a road right of way. But then if you're in a road right of way, you don't want to have anything be a hazard to a car hitting a post. So that's where some of those standards come through. But I think that's something for probably Alex and I to kind of look at as one of those other customizations, just to make sure that it could be dropped in more easily for like a bid package. But that's a great question.
Thank you. Alex, I'll direct this question at you. In the development of the sign, and both of you feel free to weigh in, but in the development of the sign typologies and the formatting of the signs, we have a question about watersheds. And Laura mentions that trails benefit when flowing water is a feature. We see that in a number of trails through the Metro Park system, as well as the towpath. The question is, can the signage connect existing and new Cuyahoga County parks using watershed identity, i.e. Mill Creek Greenbelt? And maybe just relative to the sign development, did we consider watersheds as one of the identifying features in the typology?
So I've read that question. I'll say that I love acknowledging watersheds. I think that it's great stuff. I remember, I don't know, probably 10 years ago now, I think Soil and Water District did it, where you see a lot of the like entering Mill Creek watershed and entering Tinkers Creek watershed as you drive. But I think that we're still in sort of the education phase of using watersheds, and that when it comes to wayfinding, that information wouldn't necessarily help you to find your way for most people yet. I think that where water comes in to this plan particularly is when it's useful for wayfinding. And so when we oversimplified those maps, we left off a lot of water features, and that was a mistake, because as you're riding, whether it's, you know, looking over the hill at the old river channel, or, oh, I've crossed this creek, that's something that, you know, our human brains from time immemorial have used for wayfinding, right? I'm on the north or the south side of the creek. And so we have to be intentional about what's included there and what's labeled there and how that works. So I don't know that I would go as far as watershed identities, but including water in wayfinding is important.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Similar follow-up question, is transit integrated into the wayfinding program?
It is quite a bit. It's very much integrated into our pedestrian wayfinding program, and we learned, you know, in the intervening years that was up, and we were planning this, that was really important. So on those on-trail directionals, you'll see arrows and walking distances to rapid stations, to major bus interchanges, all that kind of stuff. And then as well as on the map, on the kiosk style, the rapid always appears on the map. And I want to say we've got sort of major bus nodes on there as well.
Yeah, and on the wayfinding signage, especially the Red Line Greenway, where you do have some adjacency, that was, you know, part of that discussion of what's kind of above the line, what makes it onto the sign in terms of attractions and things, was we held transit very high as one of those things to call out. There were some issues with, like, how close is it to get there, and are there some additional signs, maybe even off the trail, that you might need to supplement? And so there are a couple of instances where we need to follow up with, you know, City of Cleveland or RTA to see if there's some additional, almost as confidence markers that can keep you going. I'm thinking about the West 65th Red Line station that's a little bit hidden, and it's not on West 65th. But that's one of those instances, but we definitely call it out, major like red lines, but we're not calling out the specific bus stations or bus stops, transit waiting areas, because those can change. That's one of the things with the downtown pedestrian wayfinding signage that was very clear that we've held with this wayfinding system, is you don't want to put ephemeral things on there. Major attractions, major locations. So nothing that's going to have to cause you to redo your signs, like, as soon as they go in.
Thank you. Another question, are there any known sources of funding for signs? Maybe if we're just thinking about the signs, many of this other sessions throughout the conference over the last couple of days have talked about funding sources and, you know, on the infrastructure side and the trail projects as a whole. What about just the signs? Yeah,
so I mean, as part of a larger construction project, you can usually have signage in there, but there are programs like the NOACA's Transportation for Livable Communities Initiative implementation. Signage and wayfinding is an eligible item there. I know, like how I mentioned that ODOT was looking for funding for signage for the US and state bike route system. They've been going after, I think they've made a couple of applications to funding sources specifically for the materials to, you know, construct the signs and distribute them. So it is possible. Obviously look at any of the grant criteria, but there is funding that's out there.
And one thing I would add to that is, you know, having this guidance and this framework, you know, makes it easier and easier to know what to ask for. right? So if you're planning a project 5 years out and you don't necessarily even know what the alignment's going to be yet, it's hard to know how to line item that signage in. But the more that we do this, and the more that we do this with this package, we'll have more and more data to process, right? So if in 5 years, 3 different communities plus the metro parks have done this, we can say, well, you know, when you use this system in the correct way, you're planting about X signs a mile and they cost about this. So, you know, put this in your line item. So really anything you can do to get more honed in on that number is helpful from a grant writing perspective.
Right, and if you utilize the system, I mean, the upfront work, the vast majority of it, like Alex said, 80% of it's taken care of. You have templates. You still have to do the work of laying out what goes on those sign faces, but that's why Destination Cleveland was behind this. That's why kind of Greenway Partners is behind this. We're helping kind of support the entire county, and they can utilize this already created system, save a lot of money, hit the ground running, and focus efforts really on paying for the signs themselves.
Yeah, you don't need much of a design line item. It's all just construction and installation.
Fantastic. I do want to give the folks who have tuned in today the final call for registrations for the mobile workshops. Registration does close at noon, so you have just a couple minutes to get those final registrations in. If you've been waiting, wait no longer, do it now. Okay, I just have one more question here. This is a maintenance question. So how are things like graffiti or damage to the signs handled after they're installed?
I think it probably depends on the materials and how much you can really clean off of it. We're going with a max metal with a vinyl overlay. And that's the sign guide specs out an 1/8" aluminum with vinyl overlay. The vinyl, you can get some stuff off, but it might be that you have to replace some signs. And hopefully they're also in locations too, since they're usually at like decision points and things where you're gonna have some eyes on the trail, eyes on the location that hopefully they don't get. They're not in secret little spots where they can get tagged easily.
Thanks. We have one more, this is a little bit broader, I believe, trail question. But if either of the speakers have experience, how is the integration with All Trails, which is a trail app? So I guess not specifically related to signs, but if anyone has other trail experience integrating with the All Trails app.
You know, for something like that, it's usually our GIS folks that kind of check that and make sure that there's correct information. Just if mapping in general, like, were there any changes to make sure that gets chased through all the different mapping programs is difficult. But I don't have direct experience. So Alex, anything from your end?
No, I've never interfaced directly with All Trails, but you know, I definitely have submitted Google revisions and things like that. I think that you know, it's sort of on all of us as a community, a planning and design community, to do those kinds of things. Fortunately or unfortunately, we rely on the big tech companies for a lot of that information and to be the keepers of that. And so submitting those kind of revisions and flags so that the base data that we all end up using is good is important.
And I know just with the Google changing, submitting changes to Google, at least a couple of years ago, even though we were the facility owner and we're saying, no, this is wrong, you're sending people down a service road, their standpoint was unless they got enough user responses about it, they weren't going to change it. It's like, but this is ours. Like, we own it. But I don't know if that's changed, but it was kind of crazy.
Very interesting. Well, Sarah, Alex, we've been very lucky to glean your insights and learn from your expertise on both some trail insights and the countywide sign program. Thank you so much for your time. To all the attendees, thank you for tuning in. We hope to see you at the mobile workshops this afternoon. And from here, we'll sign off.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Annie.
Thank you.